All right, well, good afternoon. My name is Alan Day. I'm the General Manager of Brazos Valley Groundwater Conservation District. I'm going to be the facilitator for the panel. We have 3 sessions. I'm not going to spend any time introducing these other than the name and what they're currently doing, so we don't take out of their time for their presentations. Our first presentation is going to be from Cary Betz. He's currently with TCEQ. He's the Manager of Permit Support Compliance and Groundwater Section at TCEQ. He's going to talk to us about reporting groundwater contamination. So I'm going to turn it over to Cary and let him come up and get started.
Thank you, Alan. And thank all of you who are here today, and thanks for having me. I am actually not representing the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality today. That's who I work for, but I am representing the Texas Groundwater Protection Committee. Let's see, which one is it?
I would do the one on the right.
One on the right. Here. Yep. Okay. The 71st Texas Legislature enacted House Bill 1458, establishing the state's policy on groundwater. It's codified as Texas Water Code 26.408. And the policy is non-degradation, and that's non-degradation with respect to use. So if you have drinking water quality groundwater and you do something that changes it to something that's only suitable for cattle, that's considered degradation, and that is against state policy. At the same time, the same legislation created the Texas Groundwater Protection Committee. It is a state agency with no staff and no funding. Each member agency of the, I'll go ahead and flip over, oops. It's got 10 members. They're all established by the statute, and the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality is the chair. It's actually the executive director of the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, and each of the members gets to select a designated representative. I've been fortunate enough to serve as the designated chairman of the committee for 5 executive directors now, and I think this is the last one that I'm going to represent. Each member agency is charged to provide staff as necessary to the committee to assist the committee in carrying out its responsibilities. And but because the legislation specifically charges the TCEQ with the bulk of the task, TCEQ provides the bulk of the administrative support. We do this through the courtesy of EPA, who funds our activities toward groundwater protection through the Clean Water Act, a grant in Section 106 of the Clean Water Act. Texas Groundwater Protection Committee meets quarterly, and we work through subcommittees. We have 2 standing subcommittees, subcommittee on groundwater issues and another one on public outreach and education. TCEQ staff members generally co-chair the subcommittees along with another member agency. It doesn't always have to be a member agency. We've had subcommittees in the past that were co-chaired by the U.S. Geological Survey, for example. The subcommittees enable the public to participate a little bit more. They're kind of excluded in a way because the membership of the main committee is set, but our subcommittee membership is open to pretty much anyone with an interest and who wants to participate in groundwater protection activities. We have a 3rd subcommittee that's a legislative report subcommittee. We reactivate it and deactivate it as the need every biennially, every 2 years. In order to prepare a report for the legislature. Moving Like I say, we have 10 member agencies, and the two big regulatory powerhouse agencies on the list are the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality and the Railroad Commission of Texas. Groundwater Protection Committee has certain responsibilities, and I'm not going to read them to you, but we're coordinating activities, and we're developing a comprehensive groundwater protection strategy that was last updated in November last year. And it's an interesting document. We took it from 130 pages down to 4. And we've better integrated our main publications. Our report to the legislature is better integrated with the strategy, and we're now starting to work on something called the Joint Groundwater Monitoring Contamination Report, which is another mandated report, and that's really kind of the heart of what I'm going to talk about today. We've been trying to streamline these publications and strategies. I mean, our previous strategy was created in 2003. Now, you come up with, an idea, we need better data management. And you come up with that in 2003, and shoot, how many iterations of the iPhone have we had since then? You know, we have so many different ways of manipulating data now that weren't available to us when the strategy was created. So we've tried to streamline the document so it's more responsive, more interactive, and we're not meeting every 6 years or every 10 years or every 12 years trying to hash out a new strategy. This one is more or less can be changed fairly quickly to respond to the changing needs in the state. The joint report that I mentioned is our workhorse document. We are charged with producing that every year, and we're supposed to document all the groundwater protection activity programs of the member agencies, as well as all the documented groundwater contamination cases. In addition, we have a historic groundwater contamination case, and case table, excuse me. And those tables are situations where we may have groundwater contamination still in place, but the actual case has been closed without cleaning it up. It's either there's deeds recorded saying that there's groundwater contamination present, or it's confined to a specific site or something like that. Or it's a case our public drinking water program has a habit of saying, we have groundwater contamination in this well over here, and our solution is to shut the well down, and now the case is closed. This was a lot more common in the past when the drinking water program was over in the health department, but it's been over with TCEQ for about 25 years now, so we're still working on it. Okay. The majority of the cases are, let me give you a few statistics out of the 2018 data. We compile the data every January. We start compiling data in January of every year for the preceding calendar year. That's what the statute wants us to do. And we're, for 2018, which is the most current data that we had 551 confirmed groundwater contamination cases under the jurisdiction of the Railroad Commission of Texas. We had 2,756 confirmed groundwater contamination cases under the jurisdiction of the TCEQ. Most of the cases with the Railroad Commission have been, or obviously they're oil and gas related. It's kind of split between benzene, xylene, toluene, the hydrocarbon contaminants, and chlorides or salt water. So that's interesting. And the TCEQ cases are predominantly refined petroleum product from leaking petroleum storage tanks. This is a very important definition, not the first one, but the second one, groundwater contamination. And this goes to the heart of who do you report groundwater contamination to. The phrase, any detrimental alteration of the naturally occurring quality of groundwater. That's groundwater contamination, but we have a limiter because we're regulatory programs. It is limited to contamination suspected of being associated with activities under the jurisdiction of the TGPC's member agencies. So, groundwater, of course, so I now have about 10 pages taken out of a memorandum of understanding between the Railroad Commission of Texas and the TCEQ that identifies which agency is responsible for which groundwater type of groundwater contamination. So the question, who responds? TCEQ is the state's lead agency on hazardous substances, including refined petroleum products. And I apologize for fumbling with my notes here. And just about any other kind of hazardous waste that you can imagine. Municipal solid waste constituents fall under the jurisdiction of TCEQ. I'm running through the programs in my head. Brownfields, though the Railroad Commission does have a brownfields program that I was just recently made aware of. Let's see, public drinking water contaminants. Again, like I say, when a public drinking water well is impacted by a contaminant, then typically our public drinking water program gets the water supply corporation or the municipality back in compliance, but then we'll refer now cases over to another program area within TCEQ, or perhaps in the case of oil and gas exploration issues, the Railroad Commission. Some of the groundwater conservation districts have some water quality protection authority in their enabling legislation or in whatever mechanism created them, whether it was a petition or legislation. Those EAA is notable among them, perhaps, but those programs, according to the Water Code anyway, are subordinate really to TCEQ's authority. So a few years ago, EAA came in, started talking to us about their water quality protection programs and some of their rules, and they talked to us, and we discussed the relative authority of the two entities, and we came to an agreement, and we haven't heard any more from them, so I guess we're okay. I know they have some rules, some protection for their aquifers, and TCEQ is generally okay with those. Chapter 26 of the Water Code also says that all matters pertaining to water quality, groundwater quality, are under the jurisdiction of the Executive Director of the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. So that's pretty broad ranging. So where does the Railroad Commission come in? Okay, Railroad Commission, lead agency for spills or discharges from all activities associated with the exploration, development, or production, including storage or pipeline transportation of oil and gas and geothermal resources. So they're responsible for any contamination that results from oil and gas drilling operations. They're responsible for any contamination that results from the storage of hydrocarbons in underground facilities, such as salt domes. They are responsible for crude oil by pipeline from whatever source. So if it's offloaded from a tanker and brought into a refinery, that transit, if that pipeline breaks, that one's under the jurisdiction of the Railroad Commission. So there's some very well-defined things in the memorandum of understanding that we have with between the Railroad Commission and TCEQ, and that's in the Railroad Commission's rules found in 16 TAC, Texas Administrative Code, Chapter 3.30. So if you have a question and you're just dying to know who to talk to, who do I report this to? Well, that tells you the specific authorities between the two. However, most of the time you don't want to flip through an administrative code and figure out what's going on. So if you become aware of a spill or discharge under TCEQ's jurisdiction, contact the TCEQ. If in doubt, go ahead and contact the TCEQ. They will respond. What I talked about earlier being the under the authority of the agencies, a lot of times groundwater conservation districts in particular will encounter situations where we had a district in kind of west central Texas that called us and said, hey, we've got fecal coliform contamination in a bunch of our wells. We think there's a groundwater plume. And okay, let's see, fecal coliform, yeah, sometimes it's naturally occurring, sometimes it's not. We have a wastewater plant in the area. Okay, we'll send an inspector out. Our inspectors came out. They couldn't quite duplicate the results from what the groundwater district had obtained, but it was still a pretty good concern to them. And I told them, I advised the groundwater district at that time if our agency wasn't going to do any more because they couldn't duplicate the results, but I advised the Groundwater Conservation District to go ahead and make a submittal into the Joint Groundwater Monitoring Contamination Report because they were continuing to pursue that investigation and trying to establish the source of their fecal coliform testing results. They didn't pursue the reporting for the inclusion in the joint report. That's kind of a shame. I really wish they had. We're not going to make anybody do it, but that is an option available to groundwater districts. If you have a case of contamination that you're following, you can, and the big agencies, regulatory agencies won't do anything about it, you can go ahead and report that in the joint report and we'll carry it, guarantee you. It doesn't help you maybe, but at least it's out there and it's public knowledge and you can demonstrate that you've been doing something about your perceived groundwater contamination problem. We have a spill reporting hotline. We have other things. Oh, and going back to this idea of things under our jurisdiction, TCEQ looks at things like nitrate. Unless you're next to a fertilizer batch plant and you have nitrate in your well of 300 milligrams per liter, that's pretty good smoking gun. We have a possible responsible party. Call TCEQ. I guarantee you they'll come out and look at that one. If you've got 15, 20 milligrams per liter of nitrate contamination, you're out in the country somewhere, you can call TCEQ. Odds are they're not going to respond. The Water Development Board, one of our sister agencies, does have a very good collection of ambient groundwater quality data, and so before you go out and say, oh, I got a nitrate problem or I got an arsenic problem or something like that, you may want to check that board database for background levels, and it might save you a call. It might be actually naturally occurring. That's the procedure we generally use when we get a call for something like arsenic or nitrate or some kind of metal. We'll look at the board's database and see what kind of background information that they have. If you have a problem with oil and gas. And we met with the Railroad Commission a couple of weeks ago, had a good meeting with them, and they told us at the meeting that 90% of their complaint calls involve salt water. My well salted up. So that's a little different from what the statistic shows in our joint report. Like I say, it's pretty evenly broken out between saltwater and crude or drilling constituents. So saltwater is not real common in the state of Texas. Generally, our water quality is really good. So if your well does salt up and you've got drilling activity nearby, you may want to give the Railroad Commission a call. I'd still call TCEQ. So just to let them know. Now, agency record keeping, I'm going to go through this real fast. TCEQ is bound by the same statute that created the Texas Groundwater Protection Committee and set the non-degradation standard up. We're bound to notify private water well owners of groundwater contamination. We also have to notify the groundwater conservation districts. Notification has to be conducted by first-class mail. We can't use a hang tag. We can't go knocking door to door. We can't use a public service announcement. We do this, one of our big cases is up in the Lubbock area. It's an Air Force base, and they've got chromium, and they've got PFAS, which is a firefighting foam constituent. And we've been sending out, I think we're up to 300-400 letters notifying residents, hey, you got this groundwater plume. They already know it because the feds have been out there in force providing them with bottled water and everything else, but we still have this obligation under the law to let everybody know. We do use, and other agencies like the Railroad Commission have an obligation to contact us. We haven't heard from the Railroad Commission in a number of years, which is kind of suspicious because of all the oil and gas contamination. So they're going back through their records even now and making sure that they've complied with letting us know. We had some retirements over there, and I think some of the things got kind of lost in the shuffle. We also have to notify let's see. Yeah. We also have to notify local officials, county judges and public health officials of any groundwater contamination that might present a public health hazard. So our interpretation of that is we notify them about any groundwater contamination that might impact a public drinking water well. I know that lets the private well owner out, but we have this other mechanism that we use to notify private well owners. And this has been something that the Groundwater Protection Committee has been pointing out for many years is our public drinking water program. Oh, we don't have jurisdiction over private wells. Yeah, but they're using the same water that the public drinking water is using. So if that's contaminated, these folks need to know too, and they need to have an avenue for getting some relief. So, what else? Okay, and very briefly, the joint report. The data out of the joint report has recently within the last 3 years, become available on a groundwater data viewer. And the data is down there. You can just go to TCEQ's website and type in GIS viewers up in the little search, and it'll pop up the web page. There's a lot of good viewers on there, including a water well database viewer, and the groundwater contamination viewer has all the information from the joint reports for, I think it's 14, 15, 16, 17, and we're about to update it with the data for 18. It's not gospel. Some of our locations have to be geocoded, so we have confidence intervals on these things, but we're good. We're we're in the ballpark. We're in the right county. Okay, I'll give you that much. Let's see. Recently, and I'll cover this very briefly too. Oops, sorry. There we go. House Bill 2771. Jurisdiction between Railroad Commission and Commission on Environmental Quality. And this was the only change between the two that came out of the 86th legislature. Discharge of produced water is moving over to TCEQ from the Railroad Commission. You have to get a permit. Once the process is complete, you will have to get a permit, a wastewater discharge permit from TCEQ in order to discharge produced waters into waters in the state. They have to meet surface water quality standards. You'll have to go through the regular, or a producer will have to go through a regular TCEQ permitting process, and everything that's associated with that. But this only takes place after the TCEQ applies for delegation from the US EPA and after US EPA grants that delegation. We've got, TCEQ has some friends at EPA Region 6, so this process might be expedited. It might be sooner rather than later, at which time the produced water issue will transfer over to the Commission on Environmental Quality. In the meantime, if you suspect that discharged produced water from an oil and gas drilling operation has impacted your groundwater, in other words, they dumped it into a pond and it's leaked out of that pond, contact the Railroad Commission until those changes are made. Okay. And that's a list of references, and I think these are going to be made available, right? Okay, good. And the last thing I'm going to tell you, our contact information. My name is up at the top, but it's crossed through. That's because in 5 days that number won't get you anybody, because I'm leaving the state for retirement. But Mr. Bearhay is my right-hand man at TCEQ and with the Groundwater Protection Committee. And Kelly Mills there, many of the Groundwater Conservation District folks know Kelly. He's my assistant division director, and he has worked with the committee as well. So my parting word for you, when you talk to Abby and you talk to Kelly, you can blame me, because I said if you have groundwater contamination, go ahead and call the TCEQ. We will look into it. I can't guarantee you that there will be any resolution, but we will look into it. So.
Anybody got any questions for Cary? Ron. Go, Ron.
If the produced water is not cleaned up to, discharge standards, if it's high, very salty, does that stay with the Railroad Commission, or is that going to the TCEQ?
It's going to the TCEQ, and they're going to have to clean it up. It cannot be discharged.
Jason?
Cary, under what circumstances does a known groundwater contamination issue get removed from the report, the data set, et cetera? So you were near like an old dry cleaners. And somehow it was discovered, and then someone is engaged to, let's say, remediate it, and then so many years later it gets removed from the list.
Okay,
Describe how that occurs.
you bet. Each of the regulatory programs within the Railroad Commission and within the TCEQ has its own set of criteria for cleanup. Some of them you're going to hear in a minute about something called the TERP rules, Texas Risk Reduction rules. But generally, each program has its own specific standards for cleanup, and that's because most of these programs are federally delegated, and each of the federal programs have their own sets of cleanup standards or whatever else. The joint report, once a case goes in there, it usually comes in the investigation, preliminary investigation stage. And there is an enforcement status matrix and codes associated with each one of those cases. And through the years, you can follow that case status. Once a case is closed, it receives a code of 6, which means action completed, or 2A, which means basically, well, we're done as far as we can get done. At those points, once we get that code, it stays in there 1 more year, and then it's removed from the tables. But they have to achieve either an actual cleanup standard, or they have this designation that, hey, we've done all we can. And of course, on each of these things, you have a case number, so you're welcome to contact the agency about that case in that program area.
One more, and then we'll take one more, and then after that, you're gonna have to come so we can move on. Go ahead, right there.
What if a farmer wanted to use treated produced water to water his crops? Once you, assuming you get the NPDES delegation, does TCEQ issue that permit, or you have to pay it forever?
I'm thinking that the TCEQ would issue that permit because currently we have no discharge permits included in the permitting process, and those include irrigation permits. So all of our reuse water, that's governed by a TCEQ permit. So I'm imagining we'll have to wait and see what kind of rules come out of that and what the actual EPA delegation says, but I'm betting that it would be with the TCEQ as well.
Joe and Gary, I know y'all got
I
questions.
just got like, did you say you're retiring?
That's what I said.
Like gone, leaving, retiring?
Yes, sir.
Well, thank you for all you've done because we appreciate you.
Thank you.
You deserve a round of applause.